I was at the movies with my children to go see Moana, Disney movie you get dragged to. And there's a scene where her ghost of a grandmother meets her in the ocean. And I was like, it was the first time, it was a year and a half ago, and I've been doing VR for almost 10 years. And it was the first time where I was in the movie theater, and I was like, why is there a box? Why can't I see the whole world like I do in the real world? And that's why I talk about breaking the frame. I think the frame is over. And we have to think about the fact that we experience this world all around us, and why do we have to have it in a box? And I think, the box is useful, and this can be beautiful, and we'll still have really wonderful things we'll see through the box, but I think that we need to always be thinking about breaking the frame now. Okay, I think we can launch in. Let's see what happens.
You hear me now, Nonny?
Mucho gusto, eh?
Nice to meet you. Molt de gust.
Yes. Hello from Los Angeles, California.
Welcome to Barcelona. Benvinguda a Barcelona. I don't know, Nonny, if I could ask you to raise your arms. A veure si pot aixecar els braços. Ja veieu que els aixeca. Keep them up, because now we'll show the robot. I ara anirem a veure el robot, que ja veieu. Can you move them a little bit more? A veure si els pot moure una mica més. Up and down. Doncs ja veieu que el robot reacciona perfectament amb la Nonny. Nonny, I'm ready to interview you now for a few minutes. Li farem una entrevista a la Nonny per veure què li ha semblat aquesta experiència. You're a journalist, ella és una periodista, i fa una estona ha entrevistat un científic de Barcelona. You just interviewed a researcher from Barcelona, but in a body of a robot. What was that experience like?
So for me, it starts to feel very natural after a while. Occasionally, there's some problems with the eye movement of my head if I move too fast. But beyond that, very quickly, I'm there in Barcelona with you.
So this is an embodied way to start thinking about experiencing other places through robots. So it's even more than just going inward. It's how do you control your body. And I had the most weird experience afterwards because I saw a video of somebody else controlling that robot. And I was like, ew, she's in my body. And so it's this extraordinary connection that you start to have if you use your physical body. But how would I end up in these two places at once? Well, the truth is we're hardwired to adopt representations of ourselves as real. And let me tell you exactly the kind of work that's been done around this. This is a simple study where this man was seeing himself from behind. Those video glasses went into that camera, and then he saw himself from behind. And they brought a hammer down in front of the camera, and he jumped because he felt that he was where he was seeing himself from, not where he was sitting. Like we have this sense of ourselves through what we see and hear and feel, not necessarily even where our body is, right? Here was a very interesting study where they were trying to help paraplegics, and they were hooking them up with brain-computer interfaces to try to get them to control mechanisms to help them move their body. But they had them in VR goggles for about a year, and what they found instead was that they returned some bodily function. It wasn't huge, but by seeing themselves and manipulating their body, they created new synapses or restored synapses that allowed them to control their bodily functions, like when they went to the bathroom, and some movement. It wasn't like they got out of their chair and ran around, but it did return some quality of life. And this was a completely unexpected finding. It wasn't what they were looking for. They were trying to teach people how to run these mechanisms, but instead, people were able to start controlling their bodies again. So what you see is so strong in what your body does. Really, we think so much outside of our body as much as within our body. And this is one reason why VR is so powerful. So I began to apply these ideas to something I was calling immersive journalism. I took my training as a traditional journalist and began to think about how could I use this powerful medium to tell stories I cared about. So basically, it puts the audience on scene, just the way, as much as, virtual reconstruction, but one that we always care about. And we have to use regular boots on the ground, collection of data, audio, video, etc., and then use that sense of presence that I was beginning to describe to you, this sense of your body being outside yourself based on what you see, to put you on scene. Really, it's not a new idea. Sorry, I'm a little behind on my slides. I'll be a little more careful. But basically, it's not a new idea. Journalists have always tried to take you there. There was a reporter named Martha Gellhorn, an American reporter, and she was working on World War II. On World War II, she was on the ground, and she called it The View from the Ground, that she was trying to get the audience to understand what she was seeing. And then an very famous American journalist called Walter Cronkite had a series in 1957 called You Are There.
Are Mexican citizens. Their province is part of the Mexican nation, but their difficulties with the central government have steadily increased. Now there is open rebellion.
March 5th, 1836. The siege of the Alamo. You are there.
So they kind of tried to command you to be there with that voice, right? That was like the attempt to get you to be on scene. Then there was a whole series of things in documentary games. Anybody here familiar with JFK Reloaded? So JFK Reloaded just basically let you play the shooter, and this is how do you deal with the conspiracy theories. Could it be done? Could you actually make the shot from the book depository? And once somebody was able to achieve that on the game, they pulled it off the web. It was basically a way to say, well, actually it was possible, and to overthrow some of the craziness around it or whatever. There was another very interesting one early on during the John Kerry, George Bush original election, in which he had won a Swift Boat medal as a captain in Vietnam, and there was accusations that he didn't deserve the medal. This game just let you play John Kerry and see whether you thought he in fact could have performed the heroic deeds that the medal was awarded for. And then there was the most controversial one, 911 Survivor, where you just played a victim, essentially. And in this particular game, it was made by students from San Diego, and the student described to me he was up gaming, and it was 3 a.m, and he had his TV on, and suddenly he was seeing people jump, and he couldn't make sense of this personally, so he took this game that had a lot of, and he stripped out the weapons and the shooting and the players, killing each other, and hacked in and made this piece. He was sued by the game company, and they lost. They had to pay $30,000 for having done this. But I would say that the other developer said the game itself is not really a game at all. It keeps no score, actual track of time. It's merely a moment caught in time. And I would suggest that's what journalists are always trying to do. So one of the documentaries I made was called Unconstitutional. It was made in 2003, and it had a huge segment on Guantanamo Bay Prison. And so Gitmo, of course, is still open, and I decided to apply very early on with funding. That's a little cut off, sorry, some things didn't come through in Keynote. The MacArthur Foundation, which is a big foundation in America that some of you may be familiar with, and the Bay Area Video Coalition with a grant to translate an existing documentary into a digital project. And this was my first project, and what I was interested in is, how do you report on a landscape when you're denied access, when you can't even go there? And the idea was we built a virtual but accessible Guantanamo Bay prison in contrast to the real but inaccessible prison camp. It was originally built in Second Life, early virtual world. And as I said, you have to use real journalistic research. I had done a ton for the film. And this was a photograph that was smuggled out of how detainees were being brought to Gitmo. And this is basically how the Second Life piece looked. Here's a little video.
As soon as I had put on my orange jumpsuit, I was thrown into the back of a C-17 transport plane, and
you're immediately bound, and then a black hood comes over the vision of your avatar.
Shut up!
We then integrated some sounds that were based on descriptions of what real detainees heard. When the black hood is removed, you find that you're in a cage. Most of the footage is from original Defense Department shots of detainees in Guantanamo Bay.
A replica of Camp Delta will be added to this Camp X-Ray soon. Nonny wants it to include a habeas corpus game, enhancing the simulation of a place outside of the law.
Like a regular...
So this is what we kind of built for that. you know, what does it mean to lose your rights, right? And so you would be allowed to query, like, can I call my family? And it would come back and say, you can't call your family. Can I call my lawyer? No, you can't call the lawyer. And this starts to help people understand, what does it mean to lose your habeas corpus rights? There was a lot of stuff in the press about that in America without really defining for people and understanding, what does that mean? What does that mean to be in this legal black hole? So that piece then ended up being rebuilt in Unity for the Moscow Museum of Modern Art in 2013. And then led, during that process, to a very interesting project, which became my first sort of walk-around VR. Second Life, you could only access just to your computer and your keyboard. We had this Freedom of Information Act material on a detainee who the Bush administration had said was tortured. So there was no question whether this guy had been tortured or not. There was no debate about what had happened to him. And the thing that was being bandied around a lot was being in a stress position. And what did that mean? Like, what was a stress position? How do we talk about that in an embodied way? I was invited to a lab in Barcelona. If anybody's familiar with Mel Slater and Maria Sanchez Vive's work, they were doing early walk-around stuff. And so we started to take some of these issues of the stress position and tried to bring it to VR. So we took that log that I just showed you, and we coupled it with then what was called the head-mounted display. And please pay attention to the headset, and this is kind of an interesting part of the story. And here's a video.
On this head-mounted display, if this is uncomfortable, tell me. All right.
So basically, people were wearing a breathing strap, and so when they saw themselves in the mirror, they could see themselves breathing. How well can you see that? Do we need to turn off more lights? Can you see it okay, you guys? Okay, great. Okay. So, of course, the next question is, when we built this piece, it was a subjective piece, right? Putting someone in a stress position is sort of a subjective kind of thing. But this video came out afterwards. Oh, I just want to say at the end of this, I interrupted myself, but anyway, people were wearing a breathing strap so they could see themselves breathing in parallel with that mirror. When they looked down, they saw their knees up. And afterwards, we had people, by the way, just sitting on a chair like you're sitting, but with their hands behind their back. But afterwards, when we asked people what was their body like, they reported being hunched over in a stressed position. It was very amazing. I might have a picture in here coming up, but forgive me if I'm a tiny bit jet lagged. But anyway, this idea of subjectivity, if I have control of you, does that break some of the ethical nature of how we report? So the following video came out after we made our piece, and nobody had seen what was going on in those rooms until this video had come out. So that was a stress position they'd put people in, right? You weren't allowed to sit. You had to be in this kind of crouched position, right? So I think that actually this came out after we made our piece, and we actually were not far from an ethical representation. The next piece that I made was called Hunger in Los Angeles, and it was in association with the University of Southern California Journalism School, in which they were doing a piece called Hunger in the Golden State, and the students were doing traditional, now I think, video, audio, photographs, etc. But I wanted to make a virtual piece, and I sort of asked the students who wants to work with me, and nobody raised their hands when I said I want to work in VR. That was published in March of 2010, so it kind of gives you an idea of the timeline. And I ended up getting an intern who was graduating, just about to enter university, and was the daughter of a friend who was a professor. And together we went out to food banks and started recording audio. And she came back to my office one day in tears because in this long line, there was a man with diabetes, and he didn't get his food in time, and his blood sugar dropped, and he collapsed into a diabetic coma. And using that audio, we decided to build a piece. Now, I had no budget. I had my colleagues kind of pointing their finger at me and saying, you can never do this will never work for journalism. I'm sure already you guys have some of your own questions to ask, but we'll keep going to the end. But this gives you an idea of the audio and how we built the piece.
Okay, he's having a seizure. Okay.
Need help.
So for the man on the right, by the way, that's Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu, if you know, the director of Revenant and Birdman, who just had a VR piece. But I was introducing Alejandro to VR with this piece. But you'll see for him, he's very careful not to step on the body. He's going to walk around the body looking at the woman on her cell phone. And even though he's got that crazy contraption on his head, and that he can see outside of the edges of this, do you see how he's very careful not to walk around the man on the ground? And that's how powerful this is. So that piece got into, let me just turn that up a little bit. Sundance, January of 2012. It was the first VR piece to premiere at Sundance. And again, there's this crazy headset, right? It was called the Wide 5, and the Wide 5 was $50,000 a headset. And the head of the lab at USC was like, you're not taking that to Sundance, no way. So we had to make headsets. And fortunately, there's this kid kicking around. You can see it's us experimenting, trying to get a headset we could take with us. And the right next to me is a guy named Tai Fan, I think one of the biggest unsung heroes in all of what went on. But anyway, we show up at Sundance with something that looks like this. And then on opening night, I don't really know how people are going to behave. But the reactions were extraordinary. So the man, as you can see, is down with the seizure here. And you can see she's down and completely shocked, and actually comes out of it just bawling, right? Trying to talk to him, wants to help him, doesn't know what to do, right? And the amazing thing is this happens over and over and over again through this event. And I have to tell you, I was as shocked as anybody. And one of the things I was saying that I literally spent $700 of my own money, begged and borrowed favors, had to become a better coder, got virtual humans donated to get this piece made. I didn't have enough money for motion capture for when he collapses and he passes out to literally sit him back up again and have him go away into a hospital, into the ambulance. Like that requires like a digital expensive process, and getting less expensive, but back then very expensive. So a lot of people thought he died at the end, and that was really journalistically reprehensible of me. And like I had to learn ethically that, oh shit, you can't leave people, because you hear the audio where the ambulance drivers say, okay, you want to ride to the hospital? I thought, okay, I've told people that there's something going on, but they just saw this passed out man, and that was very intense to learn about some mistakes I was making already. In any case, that headset, if you look in that corner, it says PR4 HMD, signed Palmer Luckey. Some of you may know, 9 months later, at that point he was crashed in my hotel room, driving the truck back with like the intern. And then 9 months later he starts the Oculus Rift, which he sells to Facebook for $3 billion as it turns out. 2.5 years later, ends up on the cover of Time magazine and the most memed cover of Time magazine. I have to say I feel kind of a little bit proud that a lot of this started with a piece about hunger. That same really talented team made these mobile viewers, these fold-up mobile viewers, which people might know, and that was me kind of beady-eyed at Google, and I was handing them out in March of 2012, going, look, these really are the future. And then this came, and with my New York Times about 1.5 years ago now, almost 2 years. But what an amazing trajectory, right? The thing about the Oculus, so when Palmer went off to start the Oculus, he gave me number 154, that's my Oculus, but I probably screwed up any collector value, because I put trackers on it. That thing that's stapled to the front, I wanted people to walk around. I still wanted you to have a full embodied experience, whereas the Oculus sat you in a chair. So I had to 3D print my own headsets. So it's a copy of an early headset, and that's our controllers, which you'll see a video about in just a second. So and I had to travel around with 22 motion tracking cameras and huge tripods, right? So what did I do with that? I told the story of a man named Anastasio Hernandez Rojas. He was a guy who was brought to the United States as a young boy, had never been in trouble with the law, and then on Mother's Day, he stole a bottle of tequila and a steak for his wife during the economic downturn. He was arrested, deported. His wife had 5 kids, including young twins. He tried to sneak back in. He was caught by Border Patrol. They roughed him up, and he complained to a supervisor. And rather than do anything about the supervisor, actually put him in a dark pen where he was beaten and tasered to death. And 2 people captured audio and grainy video on their cell phones, and they weren't allowed to, the Border Patrol was confiscating their phones, and these 2 people managed to escape with it. Anyway, we took it to BuzzFeed, and they decided to make a film about it. I think it's a little louder. I'll just let you watch it.
I don't even know what these are. I guess cameras?
Looks like somebody's gonna shock me.
That guy's holding a lightsaber back there.
I think virtual reality really is like the next big thing. I think it's the new video game or whatever that means.
It's so weird. There's like all these people and I'm like, what is about to happen?
How's this look with my hair? Pretty good, right?
Oh, got it. Whoa!
This is going to simulate a cell phone, so it's going to be when you press this button here, and you hold it up in front of you, a cell phone will appear, and you'll have 60 seconds to record whatever you want before your battery dies.
Oh, I see. Oh my God. That's even crazier.
All right, so there's a bunch of cops here. They're like standing around, something's going on.
Oh, right here. That's not cool.
Like on the other side of a fence, there's all these people just like kicking and beating this man, and he's screaming.
Look at this, and nobody's doing anything about it. Of course nobody's doing anything about it, right? Of course, because that's what people do, they just watch. It's kind of messed up.
Oh, here we go.
I couldn't tell before, but I think he's handcuffed.
I'm looking above. I'm seeing the horror.
Hey, we're recording you!
Already not moving, but there's like 5 dudes beating him.
Same thing, they just are not stopping. I don't know, I mean, I can't believe that like is real.
Did not expect a recreation of a real life beating.
I thought it was going to be some sort of, possibly some, entertaining game. That was not the case.
You feel kind of like helpless and isolated.
Hopefully in that situation you actually would be able to like somehow stop it, but I do think like the next best thing is recording it.
I wonder what I would really do. Like, I know you want to say stuff, it's okay to say stuff, but it's like, I don't have the power to go and arrest the police. Maybe that's problematic.
I think when you see something like that, you're like, wow, that was horrible, but at least like the one comfort that I have is like the United States justice system will do something about it, and like people that do bad things get punished for that. And then like what we've been seeing the past few weeks is like sometimes that doesn't happen.
The thing that was really sort of disorienting is that it wasn't one cop doing it and his partner, it was all these other cops sort of standing around and watching.
I think every police officer in the United States probably needs to experience what I just experienced.
I think everyone should give this a shot.
And it should not only be for entertainment. I think there should be a whole universe of stuff that we can use this for. And this is definitely something I didn't consider at all. And it's really effective.
So that story actually got very little coverage in the United States, but with the BuzzFeed piece, we were able to reach almost 1 million people. This is actually even older. I think we're getting very close to 1 million now. So it was sort of an interesting way to take what was not a really available technology and still provide a journalistic approach to telling the story. A little bit more on the making of that. This is a young woman who snuck her phone out, I guess it was a camera at that point, And she had captured the crucial footage. By the way, the Border Patrol finally settled with the family on this case. But and she was standing up on a bridge looking and watching, and I wanted her to be in the scene with you. I didn't want it to be, I'm interviewing her and she's flat and distanced from me. I wanted her next to you, recreating her story with her body as much as with her words. So we scanned her, and then we brought her in a virtual way, right? Oops, sorry, let me go back to that image. So you could, literally be standing there next to her while she was, I had her, because we had an audio capture, we could be pretty accurate, but I had her yelling the same thing she yelled, doing the same thing, pulling her camera out. Like, why should you just hear it through words? You should be able to use your motions as well. Obviously, I talk with my hands a lot, so. Anyway, when this premiered in Tribeca, as you can see, people really felt like they were on the edge. They were trying to look over and see what was happening over and over again, right? A pretty amazing, again, as you can see, you're wide open on the sides, you could see out, and yet people would be transported to that other place. Something I call duality of presence. You know that you're here, but you actually feel like you're there too. Okay, I was then commissioned by the World Economic Forum to do a piece about Syrian refugees. This was now 2013. I guess end of 12 for 2013, and I wanted to really focus on Syrian refugee kids. And let me just show you a trailer of what we built. So, how do you create that with any accuracy? This is one of our art Bibles, so you can see the kind of detailed landscape work we do, and we built this digitally. And we had to be incredibly, this is just one of them, we had many of them, and we had to find additional photographs, Google Earth imagery, any other video aftermath, and just be very, very careful that even the rubble was in the right position and the color of the buildings were right. We also tried some technologies to put the children in as themselves. It wasn't perfect, but at least we tried. At the World Economic Forum, we have everybody from Peter Gabriel to John McCain going through, and the Syrian refugee contingent. But perhaps to me, the thing I'm most proud about is it also got invited to the Victoria and Albert Museum, and they didn't advertise it. They just ran it in London for 5 days, and whoever happened to be walking past the tapestry room would see our crazy contraption, all of our tripods and stuff stuck in there, right? And sort of the old storytelling of the tapestry up against our new equipment. But afterwards, we ended up with a 56-page guest book full of comments. And I was told by curators they'd never seen such an outpouring of commentary. Absolutely fascinating, a real feeling as if you're in the middle of something you normally see on TV news, empathy for the global citizens, quite frightening, absolutely believable. But for me, this was the comment that most important to me. This was a very difficult piece to experience as a Syrian whose family is still living in alms. Although I felt that the piece was inappropriate at first, I've certainly changed my mind after experiencing it firsthand. It's important for the world to bear witness to the situation in Syria, and this is a powerful and effective way to do that. I hope you're able to grow this technology further. Kind of other projects I went on to do digitally. This was Kia. It used audio from a real...
Hello, this is Charleston County 911. We received a call from this number. Is everything okay?
My nephew's on the phone. He just called, asked us to come to your house because my sister's baby daddy has a gun on her.
What's her name?
So that's the story of two sisters who try unsuccessfully to rescue a third sister from a fatal attack by an ex-boyfriend. And we used the audio from 2 live cell phones and intercut it so that you're inside and outside the house with them. But you can see what are the ethical things we had to deal with. We never show the blood or the violence. We only let you feel the power of the sound and try to be very faithful. Again, how do you recreate the environment one-to-one from what it was really like? We had a lot of Freedom of Information Act material again. This piece was intended to take you to healthcare clinics in America where you have huge lines of protesters who yell at young women the most extraordinary things. And we were trying to get closer to fidelity, had a little better budget, and we start to scan humans. So that's a scanned person, right? And we used real audio, and then we had to use facial capture to make and motion capture to make the character come alive. And this is part of the process, but he's just mouthing real audio.
You're a whore! You're a whore! You're a whore! You're a little whore!
So, give you an idea of some of the stuff. So, this kinematic versus cinematic, I'm going to talk to you now very briefly so you understand the tools. Kinematic is what I've been showing you, where you have full body motion, you can walk around. What I think of as cinematic are the things that let you play on your mobile phone or just look around. Some of you may be familiar with cardboard viewers. How do you capture that? You plant a camera and it shoots in every direction, right? This is a number of different cameras that you can utilize. You can get very beautiful, realistic stuff. This is stuff we did with the BBC in the Calais camp. As you can see, it's quite gorgeous. This was in the Sudanese mountains. We have an incredible piece about people who are remaining and down in foxholes, et cetera. Doctors stressed out with one hospital. The people were fighting back. But if you see in the right-hand corner some of the problems you have, it's how do you get out of the scene? On the left, you'll see the microphone, and then it wraps around to his face. Getting out of the scene is very difficult. And then there's the stitching issues, which when you have all those cameras, they have to come together very neatly without leaving details out. But basically, the two forms are merging. All the new headsets let you walk around. And we're starting to capture our world with volume. These new processors that both Intel, Qualcomm, et cetera, that let you scan your world very quickly. They recognize spaces. Not only are they letting you put augmented reality, which is the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality, is you're augmenting your reality. You're using your phone to look at objects on top of your reality. Virtual reality takes you to a new place. And what they're finding is they're already working on very hard on Google Earth, letting you literally go into spaces and walk around them in a dimensionalized way rather than flat. And not only that, right now if you take Google Street View, it's got a little camera on it, and you can go around and just snap the world and it'll stitch it together. So even Google Street View is not flat anymore. You get a full 360 image. I guess it's flat, but the frame is broken. There is no frame anymore. So when you're in spaces, why would you want to only have a tiny little reference like this? You'd want to be able to go, oh, because that's what we do in the real world, right? So how do you capture objects with dimension? So if you look on the left, those are actually still shots that were taken of this object. And the programs will now let you auto-stitch things together into a dimensionalized object that you can walk around, right? So this gives you some clue of how the process is done. How have we used it? Well, this is not a video exactly. This is somebody in a headset captured walking around that space. And that space is a real solitary confinement cell in Maine. We did this in partnership with Frontline, one of America's premier investigative documentary films, right? So it's actually a solitary confinement cell. But now you have to put a person in, right? So it's photoreal. It's no longer digitally created as we had been done earlier. It's digital, but it's photoreal. Now you've got to put people in. How do you do that? You have to use multiple cameras to capture from every angle the individual to create a hologram, a moving video hologram. This is Kenny, who actually spent 6.5 years in that cell, and we brought him to Los Angeles, and you can see he's shot from every single angle. And so how do you put the two pieces together?
I walked into my cell. I didn't realize that I would be spending 5.5 years of my life in solitary confinement. I look fine, but I'm not. 18 years old, I was new to the system, never really been in trouble before. As an adult, the solitary confinement and the sensory deprivation, years of it, drove a relatively sane young man insane. cut myself thousands of times, just.
So that's a hologram. You could walk around that person in full volume. You're standing in that room with him. You can bend, you can look under the bed, you can walk around. This is not flat anymore.
That's what solitary confinement does to you. It breaks you down and it turns you into an animal.
So I was then asked by a bipartisan committee in the United States to look into the establishment of a women's history museum on the mall there. And I chose this really super interesting woman who was a newspaper publisher, and she was also a printer. And she was asked to print the first official Declaration of Independence. And when it's official, it's because all the men signed their name to it for the first time, because it was treason, right, to do so previous to that. And at the very bottom it says, printed by Mary Catherine Goddard. And she'd never put her name on anything in full before, but she essentially signed the Declaration of Independence too. In any case, she was really extraordinary, and in 1816, she freed her slave and left her all her money, which is her will. So how do, again, with zero budget, how do you make these things? Bipartisan committees don't have a lot of money. Anyway, I found in Deerfield, historic Deerfield, Massachusetts, they'd already rebuilt a revolutionary printing press. So we did the same project of photogrammetry, where you take a bunch of photographs and you get what's called a point cloud. So this is the imagery prior to cleanup. And this is what we were able to do with the holograms and the characters.
Beautifully written, as always.
You can see some full embodied.
Knowledge itself. Are Princeton and Trenton still holding?
Yes.
And what of Philadelphia?
You're posting.
So now we also are trying some other new techniques. The piece that's here, that's premiering next week, you guys can have a sneak peek if you sign up, and I think Cedric's got sign-up sheets for you. The way that we've made that piece was we both coupled 360 video and photogrammetry. So you're standing on the edge of glaciers in Greenland. And that's a NASA scientist who captures a hologram. And we also take you underwater to have you look at the warming currents. And going underwater, of course, is not possible otherwise, to walk around and move in the scene. But just so I can give you a little bit about the techniques, we clapped a camera to the edge of this helicopter. So you see flying over, right?
Well, when you look at the glacier like that, from the vantage point of an helicopter, it looks like it's going to be here forever.
But then what we did is we created a 3D model.
How could it possibly go away?
You know what? You'll get to see it yourself. But, oh, it is playing. Wonderful. So now you're inside the helicopter and you're feeling like you're looking out over that landscape yourself. So this has not been done before, where we were combining all the different technologies, because here's one of the worst mistakes you can make in VR. This is the worst mistake you can make, even though there's some pushback on this, and maybe we'll get better at this or figure something out. But if you take people and you move the camera like we would in regular film, but they're sitting still, their body says, I'm moving, or the body says I'm sitting still, but their eyes say they're moving, and that disconnect creates nausea in a good percentage of your audience. So I would stay away from that. And in this case, if you have a place where you feel like you're inside a helicopter and now it's moving, it really helps work. And we've done a lot of really fun things. We have done so much work. We've done stuff for Cartier. We've done stuff for a lot of data visualization things for like Wall Street Journal. We've done on the, which is the live feed of the stock markets and database, et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to show you a last fun one that premiered at Art Basel because it's all about the space. And this artist, Lin Yulin, did this performance in 1995, where he took this brick wall and brick by brick, he moved it across a busy landscape, sort of talking about the unbridled growth in China. I was asked by the Asian Art Archive to rebuild this piece, and so this is not the greatest video, but you'll see you now have to walk through and rebuild the wall yourself and try not to get hit by the cars like he did. Okay, that's the end of this talk, and if you have questions, I'm happy to hear them.
Thank you, Nonny. I really enjoyed that. So first of all, let me say it was absolutely fascinating. But there's something I feel a bit uneasy about, so I thought I'd just raise this, and perhaps this is a challenge for this VR technology. And the thing that I feel uneasy about seems to be that the goal, if I get it, is to create this immersive experience, to make this experience much more real than what we get when we go to the cinema in the traditional forms of seeing things. And whilst I understand that, in some ways that seems a step backwards, because it seems in theatre, for example, a big effort was made to do the opposite to that, to avoid emotional manipulation. So theatre directors might break down the fourth wall, reveal pulleys or things that are happening within the stage as a way of combating this. And so this sort of famously, I think Brecht was sort of famously the person, although I don't think it was him alone. And so I wonder what you think about that, because it seems to me that whilst if we see the sort of the evolution of theatre, it's not just aspiring to create an immersive experience and a naturalistic experience, but also to prompt critical inquiry. And so when I see this technology, I mean, I found it extremely powerful, slightly upsetting some of the scenes you showed there. And so I thought, it seems in some ways ripe for emotional manipulation. I wonder what you think of this.
It's certainly powerful, and it's certainly new, and it's certainly going to be different depending on who the person is. My work is often to try to make the invisible visible. So in that case, the hunger, people just weren't aware of what was going on at food banks. In the Planned Parenthood piece that we did, where you're at the clinics and being yelled at, that piece was taken to two communities in the South that were anti-abortion communities and shown the piece. And the results were really significant in that not only did they think the piece was made by protesters because it was a blind study, but they also really disapproved the way what was being yelled at young women, and they even indicated they would vote based on that issue against people who would support that kind of protesting. So while it may seem manipulative because you're viewing it from one point, as it turns out for this other community, it wasn't like they changed their views about abortion, but there was a bridge. There was a bridge that was built here where both sides felt the same thing, that young women shouldn't be treated that way. And then from there you go, to whatever view you're going to have. And I think that was definitely the point of the piece. So while and I try to address that early on about the objectivity versus the subjectivity, I've written a little bit about that. But I think that we've seen film used for propaganda and all kinds of crazy things, and I think that this will be used for propaganda and used for really serious manipulation. So what do? How do we teach audiences critical thinking? Because they will be manipulated unless they understand that this has, like our fake news problem, serious potential consequences. I've been lucky enough to be invited onto a commission on trust, democracy, and media, where we're trying to explore some of these ideas in the United States.
Thank you, Nonny. That was fascinating. I have a question, but before that, just a little point to re-emphasize. So obviously Nonny has the piece, the Greenland piece, on display that you just saw at the end, and I encourage you to sign up with Cedric in the break to make sure that you'll all see it. It's on in the refectory where the monk was last year, people who were here. So do that to make sure you're going to see it. And so my question is, I guess it's about because I assume that you want us to, and I think it totally works, to get a sense that we have to do something about some of the themes you said, whether that's hunger, whether that's Syria. But honestly, the way it felt for me, at least, is that such amazing proximity to suffering and actually being there in that moment, there was a part of me that wanted to sort of protect myself from this, which means that if I watch some of these things, my instinct is to say, this is so horrible that somehow I'm starting to to split myself and say I cannot actually take more of that in. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that there may be an effect that it's so shocking, it takes us out of this sort of world so much and so radically that actually I'd obviously say this is horrible and this cannot go on, but a part of me is like, and I actually don't want to see this anymore because I can't, because it's so heartbreaking to watch.
So it's very interesting. I saw with hunger, some people would, as you saw, get down and most people would get down and try to comfort the victim, but some people really felt uncomfortable and they would just back away from the whole scene. So indeed, you're going to get a whole range of how people feel about these things. The question really is, when you come out of it, what do you offer as tools for people to do something that actually works? And that's a super sensitive place for journalists. Because, as an investigative reporter, you're constantly trying to unveil these kinds of, difficult subject matter. But the question then becomes how, after you've put people through an emotional thing like this, how do you offer them some action if they want to take action? And I think that that's something we're struggling with all the time journalistically. When do you offer a organization that you think people should donate their money to? That requires a whole other level of ethical approach. With hunger, what I did was I put up the food bank, where the piece happened, so you could donate to that. I also listed nationally in America all the food banks in the nation, and I also put up a website that let people check their own charities, and they could put in the charity name, and then they could find out how much money was being spent towards something good and how much money was being spent towards just paying for administrative fees, or et cetera, et cetera. So I tried to offer various ways to check through, and act in their own ways if they wanted to, which was sort of a difficult thing. But I think, in movies, if something scary happens, you jump. I think that, obviously VR, there's some very beautiful, fun pieces as well. But I just bring it from having spent so many years as a journalist trying to tell these stories. And the last note I'll say is, in the United States, when the Vietnam War was happening and we first had mobile cameras, we started projecting all these images into the living room at 6 p.m. with families watching the TV news. That were very difficult images. And there became this pushback of like, wow, we shouldn't show that to people at that time of day. And America began to show very much more, less graphic material. But what I found then was that I would see with BBC Newsnight at 9 o'clock much more intense imagery about the Syrian war than I ever saw on American television. So what happened? Were we censoring ourselves? So these are questions I ask. And I think you raise a question that I'm not sure I know the answer to. I know that we don't make all shocking, intense material, but I do think as an investigative reporter, that's also the responsibility you take on, is how do you tell stories that maybe are uncomfortable?
Firstly, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. And I thought it was interesting what Alan said about your responsibility in terms of our engagement and manipulation, because I think that there is a significant difference between what your motivation is as an artist as opposed to a journalist as well, in that if you're trying to expose a situation, then of course, manipulation is a very dangerous word because it's very powerful, but actually if your agenda is to address an issue and to open people's eyes to it, I feel like that's a very different thing to being a dramatist like Brecht. So I find it fascinating. I do have a question though, which is that a lot of the people that were engaging with the technology that we saw were young people, and it seems to me, as someone who makes theatre, that it's a really exciting medium because it's a way of getting young people who are often on their mobile phones into engaging with much bigger issues. But have you found equally that older people, I was just wondering about the diversity of the people that you approach in your work? So
when you come into Greenland, you'll see that in particular a lot of these pieces I don't use anything but the headset, and you just walk around like you do in the real world, and that allows a bridge between anybody who can put on the headset. And that's why that 54 pages of guest book comments at the V&A was so crucial, because it was all ages, all over the world. and they were all equally engaged. I'm happy to share that book so you can review it yourself and see the kind of extraordinary commentary. And that was with really low fidelity graphics. I think it's the behavioral realism which is more important for humans. You know, we can see the Virgin Mary in a tortilla, you know, right? So like we can see what we can see, but it's about like what happens at that moment beyond our imagination. You know, we can see, I think sound is really important. But I think stage design is gonna, if stage designers will come in and join us in this field, that they can make a significant impact on how do we do spatial experiences, because they've been thinking this way the whole time. Most filmmakers are thinking flat and 2D and pushing the camera, whereas stage designers are thinking about a body moving in the space. And I think that that's going to be super interesting as this medium matures to get those people involved. I have quite a few stage design books in my office that I refer to a lot when thinking about what does a body do. Now, of course, your audiences are going to be sitting out there. They're going to be inside the story. But I look forward to what work they're going to bring to this interesting nascent medium.
And I am very hopeful that that is perhaps the future of theatre, as well as I think a lot of us feel as people who started off with a paper and a pen, and we are writers and we create words in a space, that there's something a little bit scary about the notion of technology taking over and taking something away from the innate joy of something very simple. But actually the most exciting piece of theatre I saw this year was at the Barbican, where the entire audience, it was Simon McBurney's piece, I don't know if anybody else saw it, but where we all wore headsets. It was just a one-man show, but as he moved around the stage, he moved around your head.
Right.
And it was the most fascinating and most sort of simply theatrical experience that I've had in years. So it's a really exciting point.
Again, there's no doubt this will be used for all kinds of, I even say they'll figure out a way to make you pay your taxes using VR at some point. But it's going to be used for all kinds of different things. But I think that, you know, artists are going to make it, it's going to be very interesting. And younger audiences, the other thing is, you mustn't forget that it will also be multi-personed experience. So you'll come into these spaces with other people. I mean, younger audiences, you know, I mean, the way that I tell the story of my son was in our living room with his laptop open, and my daughter walked in from the garage office, and he looked up and said, "Why did you leave?" But she just walked in the room. Mm-hmm. But what he meant was, "Why'd you leave the Minecraft server we were playing on together?" Mm. And so shared spaces, they're used to that. They're used to digital selves. Mm. So we might find this all a little bit like unnerving, but you know, I was lucky enough to speak at an event for kids who are in the foster care system, who are being trained to use some of the tools we use in the game engines. And I was on stage with Beyonce's songwriter and a couple other amazing folks. And afterwards, the kids could care less about talking to him. They wanted the VR headsets, and they want to know how to make better VR. So my audience is really more like, you know, between 8 and 15. So I'm looking forward to when they grow up, because then I don't have to feel so such an outlier. Anyway.
Well, first of all, thank you. This was one of the most extraordinary things that I've seen.
Thank you.
A quick question. As a writer, one of the things that I try to do is incorporate all 5 senses into pieces. You've incorporated audio, visual, and kinesthetic senses. Is there going to be a time when the sense of smell, the sense of environmental temperature and all of that is part of what you do?
So I don't know, has anybody here see the Carne Arena piece that Alejandro ended up doing that premiered at Cannes this year? It's running at LACMA. It's going to run around Europe as well. So Alejandro, one of the things that he did, he uses temperature. He makes you take off your shoes and you have to walk in sand. It's a very beautiful piece. He uses really intense audio that you can basically vibrate your body. I mean, so he's able he had a couple $1 million budget, so he's able to like really take advantage of what can be done to a degree. I would say that lots of body things for feel and touch, haptics is huge. Smell is very difficult, because do you really want to smell that bomb scene? You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't think so. I think right now the only thing I've seen that you know is like lemons and oranges, citrus smells are kind of nice. But like, I don't know. If there's a place that I don't want to go, it's a smell. That may be me, but that's how I feel. If there's a limitation I have.
Can I just ask one quick question?
Yes.
So universities, which I know quite well, are not. Our reality is the professor speaking to the students who are hopefully listening. Are you getting support? Are you at the University of Southern California, I think? Are you getting support from the academic community to do this amazing and really important work?
That's a complicated question, but let's just say I went off and started my own company. So I have a startup now called Emblematic Group, and I've got about 20 people working for me, bootstrapped. So I fund these through doing branded work, like I said, for like Cartier, for working with major news organization partners like Frontline and Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The New York Times has they call it immersive journalism now. I had the first paper on that, so it's kind of amazing. But they have a whole virtual reality team there, Gannett, CNN. Everybody's starting to form their VR journalism departments, which is sort of extraordinary. So we survive via the work that we do, but the university, anyway, moving on. I had a lot of colleagues who thought I was nuts. I would say now that they're very excited about this, but at the time it was very difficult. I think I've got somebody in the back row first, and then I'll come to.
I just had a quick question. That was so interesting. I've actually been quite skeptical about VR and quite worried about the future of people, just by the way that more and more people are seeming to engage with their cell phones instead of actual humans. And I've been a pretty anti-VR person, and seeing it used in this way has really opened up my mind in quite a powerful way. So thank you for that. I was just wondering, because you obviously have a strong sense of ethics and how you're using VR, and in the broader scheme of technology, I know there's a lot of questions of AI and responsibility in terms of making sure philosophy and morality and things like that are included in the pursuit of technological advance. And I just wondered if there's like some sort of community or some sort of ethical guidelines being married to this technological advance of VR as VR advances more and more and more. Like, is there some way of ensuring that we don't use VR to kind of check out of being human?
So these are all super interesting questions, right? And what does that mean? If you get it, I know my husband's on a deadline for his book, but you can always ask him a little bit about the virtual community that was formed by mathematicians sending each other letters, right? And they checked out through their books and through their reading, and they're having to communicate only through this sort of virtual letter writing way. Back when the British Post was delivering letters twice a day, right? It was like email. So I think, and then again, I said journalistically, we're constantly trying to think about what's the ethical thing to do. In the Kia piece, which got published by the New York Times, the sisters, after became activists against, activists to try to prevent other women from being killed by their partners or ex-partners. And they started an organization, and the New York Times would not let me print their organization in the piece. They just said they became activists. So it's a very interesting question of, they were trying to use their standards, working with Frontline, which is America's big PBS investigative documentary series. Oh my God, we had many difficult questions we had to try to do. Like when we did the NASA scientists, you'll see they're not really wearing big old huge parkas, even though they're sort of set in Greenland, next to glaciers. And the reason why was they were filmed on a stage in California. And are we going to tell the audience that they're actually in Greenland? Well, we can't, because they weren't really, because they were filmed in a green screen stage. And so what do you do? And these are really tough questions to answer. And in fact, one of the NASA journalists wanted to be filmed in his flight suit, because we put you on a plane with him. And Frontline was like, no way, because you're not really on the plane with him. He's like, I'm always on my flight suit if I'm on my plane. And if I'm appearing on my plane, I want to be in my flight suit. Very weird questions about what's real and what's not real. But the final note that I want to say on all this is that, yes, we're still coming to understand what's ethically correct or not journalistically. And I want to emphasize this very, very strongly, that I very much agree that tech touch does not replace real touch. That real touch is very important, and that when we get together in a space like this, ideas and energy and camaraderie and family and everything else is more important. And I think that we need to make sure we emphasize that. And the thing I very briefly mentioned was this idea of duality of presence that I'm still finding, even with the most extraordinary connection to these VR spaces, that people know that they're here even though they feel like they're there at the same time. So anyway.
Thank you so much, Nonny. That was wonderful.
Thank you guys so much.